Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. I'm Biola Labi.
I'm Tundra Abiola.
I'm Veronica Decker. Welcome back. Atiku Abubakar's robust blueprint to reform critical sectors of the Nigerian economy might have won him a few less friends than his social standing would suggest. But against the backdrop of his ongoing bid to become president, the former vice president of Nigeria would appear to have remained unshaken in his belief that urgent and pragmatic steps need to be taken in order to reposition the country for much-desired economic transformation. Mustapha Chike-Obi, a former managing director and a chief executive officer of Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria, is the economic advisor to the Atiku Abubakar Campaign Organization. He has now joined us to look at Nigeria's economy in the wake of the 2019 general election. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning.
It's good to have you on, and once again, we've talked about the last elections ad nauseum, but at the end of the day, we can't get tired of talking about what happened during the last elections. One of the things you said leading up to the elections, and once you were identified as Atiku Abubakar's economic advisors, was the idea that we would have this robust debate, and the person with the best economic plan should win the top office. Do you feel that Nigerians were availed to a robust debate on the economy? And if either way, why not? And what were your thoughts about that?
I think we did not have a strong enough debate. And I think that, look, the elections are largely over. It's now a legal matter, as far as I'm concerned. And I think we should all focus on how Nigeria as a whole can be best. And I think the biggest problem in Nigeria today, and I may be in the minority, I think is the economy. I think if the economy was better, it will address a lot of issues, a lot of the crime issues, a lot of the divisiveness in the country. And I think that whoever it is that ends up after the court processes, because court processes are part of the elections, part of the electoral process. Whatever happens, we should all work together to make sure that we address the pressing issue in Nigeria, which is the economy.
Okay. Just like you rightly said, campaigns are over, and it's now time to get down to work.
Yes.
You're not the economic advisor, but in your plans or in your thoughts, what would you feel should be the first step of business in addressing our economy?
Let me just give you background. My economic views have been consistent.
Yes.
They were consistent through Goodluck Jonathan's administration, and they were consistent through the first 4 years of the Buhari administration.
That's correct.
And it's the same thing. We need double-digit GDP growth in Nigeria to get out of the mess we're in. There's no other answer. And so when Goodluck Jonathan was president, I had access to him and his ministers, so I could express my views, sometimes very forcefully. I remember I was thrown out of a minister's office once or twice. But I had the channels, so nobody heard me in public.
Yes.
With the Buhari administration, I don't have the access. So I'm forced to say this in a public way. But it's the same views. We must grow our GDP in double digits for the foreseeable future. Nothing else will suffice. And how we do that, all economists, if the president said, yes, you guys go out and give me a plan for raising GDP double digit, all the economists, and there are many brilliant economists, they know what to do. But we have mixed messages, or we don't have a coherent message. And so we don't know what it is the president wants from the economy. You have a minister of agriculture saying ridiculous things. You have CBN governor saying things that are largely inconsistent, internally inconsistent, because nobody seems to know, nobody can point out the clear direction the economy needs to go in. And I think that's what we need from the leadership. Give us the clear direction, and we'll give you the answers.
I'd like you to actually name some of those ridiculous things and inconsistencies, but I also wanted to ask you about the IMF Article 4 consultations.
Yes.
There was good news, there was bad news. The good news is that recovery is ongoing. The bad news is that we're growing too slowly to reduce poverty, unemployment, and other social ills. What are your thoughts?
Well, I read the IMF report, and it was all bad news. It's just that they have to write it in diplomatic language. So, and the latter part of it was inconsistent as well. So yes, the economies recover. If you understand how economies work, even with no help, they will recover. You have cycles, economic cycles. You have, no matter how good you're doing, you're going to have a recession at some point. No matter how badly you're doing, you're going to recover at some point. Yes. So the recovery is a natural phenomenon. It's not anything anybody should tap themselves on the back for. What we should do is have a recovery that's strong enough, robust enough, and sustainable enough to make Nigerians more prosperous. We also have a recovery that's good enough to make Nigerians richer, not poorer. So if your GDP is growing at 2% and your population is growing at 3%, you are getting poorer. Our GDP per capita has been declining every year since 2015. So it's okay to understand that there's some obstacles and there's some setbacks, but it's not okay to pat yourself on the back and say, well, I'm supposed to get to Ibadan in an hour, and I'm driving at 10 miles an hour. It's not going to happen. But you're moving 10 miles an hour, but you're not moving fast enough for it to make any difference. By the time you get to Ibadan, the function or whatever event you're going for is over. And that's what we're doing. We're moving very slowly towards some obscure goal in the future. And we're patting ourselves on the back, at least we're moving, we're not standing still. So it's not good enough. But going back to IMF report specifically, they said many things that should concern Nigerians. One, you're growing too slowly. Two, the risks are on the downside. Three, you must get more competitive and more productive to compete with the world. So those things are really, and they talk about structural problems, they talk about all sorts of things that are holding back the economy that have not been addressed, policy issues. It was a very negative in terms of diplomatic language you can get. Then the part that's inconsistent, they then allowed Nigerians for a tight monetary policy. Now, tight monetary policy is directly inconsistent with growth. You choose growth or you choose tight monetary policy.
But I thought the tight monetary policy was to curb inflation.
Yes, but what happened to the US when they had economic problems? On Europe, they went to zero interest rates. In Europe, in some places, it was negative interest rates. They did what they call quantitative easing. They poured all the money they could pour into the issue of reviving the economy. Yes. They didn't care about inflation then. They didn't care about their currency then. All they cared about was reviving the economy and creating jobs. Now they're giving us the exact opposite advice. Keep your currency strong. Keep your interest rates high. Keep your inflation as low as you can. Kill your economy. Kill your employment. Make your goods uncompetitive so that you can be importing our goods and have enough money to pay for our goods. All of that second part of the IMF advice was self-serving, and that bothers me.
We had a guest on here last week who echoed some of the things that you've always been echoing, which is around government-backed guarantees, which is also part of pouring money into this, it's another way of quantitative easing, getting people to invest in the economy. Why has our government been so reluctant to government-backed guarantees? What's the problem there?
Well, I'll tell you. First of all, the last Minister of Finance, not the last one, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, I tell people she's allergic to guarantees. She's of the opinion that in a country like Nigeria, any guarantees will be called. This is her view. So she just doesn't like them, and she thinks that they're not well managed. So she and I had a number of issues about that. She was never going to support guarantees. One of my hopes was that with the new government, they should realize that guarantees are the only way to stimulate this economy. If you look at the budget that was done this year, they've changed a bit, but I haven't studied the new changes because they increased it because of the minimum wage and other expenditures. But the original budget that they presented, there's no way on earth they could even hit half of the revenues they need. The revenue last year for federal government was about 3.7 trillion. That's federal government revenues. Their budget is 9 trillion. There's no way they can get anywhere near that number from revenues. So the problem you have is they have to borrow to fund the budget. You reached the stage now, you saw the announcement made by the DMO that is 24.4 trillion. Yes. Well, they used 305 to calculate the dollar portion. They didn't use 360. If you use 360, it's more like 26 trillion. It's growing at a very rapid rate. It grew by 2 trillion between the third quarter and the fourth quarter last year. At this rate, we're going to get to the point where the debt is completely unsustainable and may trigger some form of restructure or default. Once you get there, there's no way back. So borrowing to fund the budget at this point is almost at a critical stage. And she also said that they almost accomplished their 40-60 ratio of foreign to local debt. And this is so good because that means they don't crowd out the local debt. The problem is she's assuming that the Naira stays at these levels. If the Naira goes anywhere near 400, 450, that foreign portion will go up by almost a third in Naira terms, and you're going to get your debt over 30 trillion, which is completely unsustainable. And it amuses me when they say it's cheaper to borrow in dollars, because that implies that the people lending you money in dollars at 7% are stupid. They are very smart people lending you money at 7% in dollars and disdaining to lend you money in Naira at 16%. So if they're smart, then we're not so smart. If we're so smart, then they're not so smart. The real answer is that the 7% in dollars is equivalent to 16% in Naira, and none is cheaper than the other. And they should stop telling us that it's cheaper to borrow in dollars, because it is not.
Do you think this government will start to change its policy on guarantees?
This government has shown no inclination to seek advice from people who say things they don't like. They've shown no inclination for that in any area, so I don't expect that they will. But they should. They should listen to all Nigerians who mean well, whether they are APC or PDP, or they should listen to people who know what they're talking about and who mean well. And if they show that inclination, I think we're better off.
Another conversation because as we're having these conversations about the economy, one of the things we talked about last week was foreign portfolio investors in comparison to foreign direct investors. And actually, some of the things you said about the IMF report, when I read it, I felt like towards the end, it was very much sort of targeting towards foreign portfolio investors. Can you tell our viewers at home why foreign portfolio investors have so much ability to speculate on our economy, and what we need to do to start to change that and bring in more FDI?
Because it's a free ride. When you have a government, especially a central bank, and the DMO, and the Minister of Finance, who tell you things like, our currency will stay at 360. Once you know the currency will be at 360, it's a free ride to borrow in dollars at 1 or 2%, invest it here at 16, 15%, knowing that you can get your money out at 360 a year later. So you make what is called a risk-free arbitrage of about 14%. So a lot of the money coming in is coming in to do that. What stops people from doing that is if they have a risk that by the time they take the money out, it will no longer be at 360, it will be at 400. There's a mathematical number at which you are neutral. And so one of our suggestions was, we should, remove the 305. The 305 is a ridiculous number. It serves to reduce the number that the states are getting, because when they use 305, they get less dollars to be shared among the states. 2, it creates arbitrage for who can get it at 305. But finally, you shouldn't have to exchange rates. So let's move the 305 and let's use the 360 that everybody knows. It will create no new inflation, because that's what's in the market, 360. And then let's adjust the currency. I think the number is roughly 1% a month. So every month, it goes from 360, that goes to 363.6, goes to 3. So everybody knows where it will be every month in the future. That will stop all this portfolio arbitrage, because now when you invest, that 16%, versus 2% difference will be factored into when you change your money 6 months from now, a year from now, and only real investors will come in, because then they're not looking at what they call the interest rate arbitrage. We should do that. And if we do that, it will give our companies an advantage over foreign goods. It will create employment, and it will grow the economy much faster. And it doesn't do much damage. People can plan ahead and know where the currency will be. If you want to travel to the UK or the US a year from now, you know.
Why are you looking at us? We don't travel to the UK.
you know where you can get your currency a year from now. There's certainty. Investors have certainty. The country has certainty, and also this crazy consumption of foreign goods by the middle class and the elite will reduce. So that's what I think we should do.
I don't want to lose the FDI conversation. In the light of the last election, one of the things investors want to see is obviously rule of law. They want to see transparency. They want to see a government that actually is engaged with its people. Do you think that we are anywhere near attracting foreign direct investors with the current rate that we're growing, with the stringent monetary controls, and also with the fact that we've just had an election that the electorate feels very despondent about. I'm not going to say more than that.
Well, look, I think that you have to love something to encourage it. Mm-hmm. The signal sent by this government to foreign investors, direct investors, is that you can come, but we'll exploit you. We'll do the MTN thing. We'll do all sorts of things. We'll go back and check. There's no love for foreign investors in the way government speaks. If government went out of, they really meant it, and they really wanted to bring foreign direct investment, they will give them certain protections that they're not getting right now. And those protections include a foreign exchange certainty. It includes rule of law, which is very important because it seems very arbitrary. Mm-hmm. It seems arbitrary. MTN has been fined twice in the last 4 years, huge amounts of fines. And you have all these companies leaving. I mean, I don't know how true it is about ExxonMobil wanting to leave Nigeria, but that would be a very big blow because once ExxonMobil leaves, American interest will diminish in Nigeria dramatically. So we must have a policy of encouraging or realizing that without foreign investment, we're not going to go very far. And that will include a lot of things, tax breaks, protections. If I were the president, I would have a special court of arbitration for foreign investors when they have problems with the Nigerian government or their Nigerian shareholders. So things are smooth, clean, they're welcomed, they're treated. If you go to Jamaica, for example, I remember I went to Jamaica 2 or 3 years ago. There's a place where they value tourists so much. You can leave your wallet in the hotel and nobody will touch it because the police are very strict on people who do anything to discourage tourism. We must have that attitude in Nigeria, where we welcome foreign investors, we encourage them, we ask them, what is it you need? And we try and provide those things. I don't think this government has shown that attitude towards foreign investment. So it's tough. Everybody knows, for example, that at some point the Naira will be devalued. It has happened under every government for the last 20 years. Not an APC thing. At some point, it's going to go from 360 to 450. It's just a matter of time. You don't want to get caught when that happens. And so that's kind of scary for investors.
But if there was
If there was a plan, a coherent plan, that everybody knew and could plan against. So you remove everything except business risk. People will come in. But I wouldn't if I was a foreign investor coming to Nigeria today.
You didn't actually answer my question about the inconsistencies that you hear from the governor of the central bank and some ministers.
Now, I'll tell you one. The governor of the central bank said correctly that smuggling is a big threat to industrialization in Nigeria. He said it was the biggest threat, correctly. But the issue is that how do you stop smuggling? There's only 2 ways to stop smuggling in a country like Nigeria. You get the borders very tight and controlled. That's never going to happen. Our borders are very porous and very expensive because we have a lot of borders to police the borders adequately. The second way is to have a weak currency policy, not a strong one, because a weak currency discourages foreign goods and smuggling. So he identified the problem, but he and his policies are the problem. Now, China is involved in a trade war with America. The sticking point, why they have not agreed till today, is that America wants China to stop having its weak currency policy, and have a much more tighter currency policy. China has refused, because if China does that, their exporting of goods, they will lose the advantage they have. So they're stuck on that issue. Meanwhile, we, tiny little Nigeria, wants to be proud and build our chest that we have a very strong currency relative to value. And so his policy is creating the smuggling that he identifies as a problem.
Oh dear.
So if he wants to solve that problem, he should actually have a weak currency policy, and smuggling will vanish.
So speaking of solutions...
So
that's the solution.
Right, but speaking of that horrific 12% rise that we heard from the DMO, our public debt, one of their solutions was a 30-year bond. What's your view of that?
What does that solve? How does that solve anything? It doesn't solve anything.
It's pointless.
The point, look, there's something called the yield curve. And the yield curve just tells you the yield on various securities at various points in time. So the 1 year, 5 year, 10 year. Usually it's 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, 30 year in the US. So you draw a curve through those yields. And when the yield curve is normal, the 1 year yield is less than the 30-year yield.
Yes.
And so, according to economic theory, the yield curve will tell you where best to issue securities. Nigeria has probably a flat or inverted yield curve where all the yields across maturities are the same. So there's no advantage in issuing a 30-year bond based on where the yield curve is. So it's just something. I mean, it helps investors who are looking for long-term assets, but it's not it has very little impact on the economy, on economic growth.
What does have an impact on economic growth?
I should tell you.
We need to get to the double digits.
We need that.
We need to get to double digits.
There are 4 main economic goods: growth, employment, inflation, and as a result of I would say foreign exchange.
Because we've made an issue in it.
So let's take those 4. If you want growth and employment, then you must sacrifice on the inflation side and on the foreign exchange side, which means if you want growth, you have to lower interest rates, have a very loose expansionary monetary policy, which will in turn affect inflation and will affect. You have to choose. You can't have all 4. It's just not possible. So you ask me, everybody knows I'm a growth guy. Let us have low interest rates. Let us have an expansionary monetary policy and an expansionary fiscal policy. And then let's do our best to manage inflation and the exchange rate. That's what I would say. That's my solution. Any other solution that's coherent will have you optimizing one or two at the expense of. There's no free lunch in this matter. So what they're doing, what I say is incoherent, is they're trying to keep inflation down. They're trying to keep the exchange rate appreciating, but they call it stable. It's actually appreciating. And the cost of that is employment. That's why we're losing so many jobs. And growth. That's why our growth is so anemic. So they tell you they want growth, they want employment. That's what they will tell you. But their behavior, which I say is inconsistent, is the behavior of somebody who doesn't really care about growth and employment. And we should have a coherent policy directed by the president who says, this is what is important to Nigeria. You guys go and do it. Because we know he's a general, he's not an economist. But he must give a clear direction, which he's not given.
What about the IMF reports talking about tax reform in Nigeria? What's your view on creating a stronger tax base?
First of all, there's tax collection, efficiency of tax collection, which we're very bad at. I think our tax rates are actually some of the highest in the world, but we're not good at collecting the taxes. So I think we should look at that. But tax also serves as a way to incentivize behavior. For example, capital gains tax should be very low. That will make companies keep their earnings. Our companies pay too much in dividends because the capital gains tax and the income tax are the same. So they pay off the dividend. In the US, the dividend ratio is much less, simply because you're better off taking it as capital gains. You keep it in your company, the price of your stock rises.
Yes.
And when you want to raise money, you sell your stock, and you only get capital gains tax at that time. And it's a lower rate than the income tax. So if we have to look at our tax policies, A, how to enforce it, and B, how to create behavior that we're looking for. For example, the banks. Banks are earning most of their monies now by buying government securities. I think we should tax banks a different rate for income from government securities and income from loans. So I would say tax them 60% for income from securities and tax them 20% income from loans. So when a bank has money, it will have a serious decision. Should I buy government securities, which is really no work? I just buy it and hold it. Or do I make a loan? Because if I buy government securities, I have a higher tax burden than if I made a loan. That will encourage loans. That will encourage banks to make loans. And that will also give the government back some money from the interest it's paying on government securities. So things like that can be done to change behavior. And I don't think that's been done enough.
I want to go back a little bit to your role as the Atiku Abubakar's economic advisor.
Yes.
And one of the things that your campaign had put front and center was actually privatization and selling off government assets, which then sort of became a point of contention, but also a rallying point for the opposition. When you look at privatization, selling of assets, and really at the end of the day, oil subsidies, if this government did one thing today,
yes,
what do you think this government can do today to start to change the tide of this economy?
Unfortunately, it requires many things.
Okay.
And so,
tell us.
If you privatize NNPC in isolation, it doesn't do you much good. So look, NNPC is a particularly bad case. The reason why NNPC is a bad case is much of our revenues in foreign exchange comes from NNPC or through NNPC. And it has consistently, under every government, been run in a very opaque and inefficient fashion. So we're not blaming this government. Under Jonathan, it was terrible. Under this government, it's bad. It's the same, we don't know what's going on. They deduct money as they wish. It's opaque, it loses money. And the belief is that government is not good at running things. And so things that government is running and not good at running, they should privatize it so that private sector said, look, private sector with government supervision is probably the most efficient way to deal with NNPC. So when people talk about privatizing, it's a matter of privatizing those things. Government should not be involved in commerce. CBN just came out and said they and the banks are going to give all sorts of monies to all sorts of, they mentioned
single-digit loans to 5 industries.
5 industries. And those single-digit loans, from my experience at AMCON, they don't work. Because you give somebody single-digit loan, but everything around him is at 26%. His inputs, his costs, his interactions are still being affected by the 26% interest rate. So in the end, it's like giving them a grant, but it's not a grant that's efficient.
But on the other hand, we're complaining about high interest.
So let them lower interest rates for everybody. So that if I'm making vegetable oil, my input is not subject to 26% interest rate, which they'll keep passing on to me. So let's lower interest rates. I say let CBN.
But at the rate that
10%.
CBN is picking all these industries, I mean, we have manufacturing, we have agriculture, now we have the creative industries. Yes. I mean, we're going on and on. We might as well just, we're almost there.
But that's not what CBN is meant to do. CBN is not a lender. CBN is not a commercial enterprise. So the more CBN takes on with this intervention loan, look, Sanusi started this intervention thing in a serious manner. There has been no industry for which these interventions have been put in. We now have 8 years of record, but has done better. They don't work. Let the interest rates generally come down. Let them, they did this token thing. The timing is
50 basis points.
Very interesting timing. They couldn't risk it during the election because it might have affected the exchange rate. So they waited till the election was over. And it's 50, it's irrelevant. It's like you taking antibiotics and they say you must take it, they always tell you to take it for 4 or 5 days in a row. And you take it for 1 day and you stop. You're actually worse off than better off. So this 10.5% means nothing. It's just not going to make any changes. And I can tell you that for free.
You haven't said anything about the oil subsidies we asked you about.
Oh, the petroleum subsidies. It's obviously a sensitive matter, but I will approach it differently. I would say to people, I will do an income test for fuel subsidy. And the way I'll do my income test is, listen, if you earn between pick the numbers, 1 and 5 million naira a year, at the end of the year, you file a return and we'll give you back 20% of your fuel costs, or whatever it is. We can work the numbers out. If you earn between 5 and 10 million naira a year, we give you a smaller amount. If you earn over 10 million naira a year, no subsidy. Because I don't understand why people who have 10 SUVs should be entitled to a fuel subsidy. So if you are in a high income bracket, no subsidy. If you're in a medium income bracket, however you define it, some subsidy. And if you're in a low income bracket, total subsidy. So the guy who spends half of his income on transportation gets a subsidy that's quite large. And the guy who has 10 SUVs and has the car going on, taking one child to one school, another child to another school, gets no subsidy. That's how I'll approach it. That way it's sensitive, it's targeted to who needs it, and it's not unaffordable to Nigerians.
I want to take you back to tax. You said that we have the highest tax. You talked about capital gains and income tax. You didn't talk about the reportedly proposed VAT hike, which is such a clumsy sentence, but there's no real clarity on that. You've heard that it's been mooted, you've heard that it's been clarified, re-clarified. Mm-hmm. Where do you stand on that?
My good Egbon, Tinubu, has stated that they shouldn't do it. VAT is a regressive tax. And so it affects the poor people more than it affects the rich people. And we should be very careful in instituting any more regressive taxes at this time. So I'll be against the VAT increase. I'll be for other. Look, 30% tax, corporate tax, income tax, is one of the highest in the world. It's just a fact. There's maybe 2 or 3 countries that are higher than us. I think there's countries that's 36%. I did the research. I can't remember the exact. But we're in the high end. And we should be reduced to 20%, but we should collect better.
Well, I mean, so because you were Atiku's...
you keep emphasizing
I know, economic advisor. I mean, you were. One of the things you said was that the next president, and if this current president tends to be the president, must be a bridge builder to the future, someone that can heal the country, fix our economy, and groom the next generation. We've seen the current administration over the last 4 years.
Yes.
Do you think this current administration, if it continues to be in office and gets sworn in at the end of next month, do you see them being able to do any of these? Do you believe that there is a posture or body language that there might be a change of tide, especially since there's they're not thinking of re-elections after?
Well, I haven't seen it, but I hope that they will be. But when you have a minister saying that his problem is people are importing pizza from London. He did say it. It's not quoted. Okay. When you have people saying that, you have a lot of these ministers who haven't performed very well in terms of the results. Whatever caused it, the results have not been good economically. All auditioning to be retained. You can see it's an audition. They are now all talking and saying things, looking for auditioning themselves. No, there should be a change. There should be a change. There should be new blood, new thinking, new methods. There should be reconciliation. There should be... Look, we don't have enough brilliant economists in Nigeria to be splitting them along lines, PDP, APC, Muslim, Christian, North, South. Anybody who is brilliant enough should be used, wherever they're coming from. As long as they love the country, they're willing to serve the country. So I haven't seen this umbrella embrace from the winning party. What I've seen is we've won, you've lost, too bad. And that's not the right attitude. I think that if there's some kind of rapprochement and reconciliation and a willingness to use everybody, I think it will even help them. It will help the judges decide the case. Because you're a lawyer, you know this is a declaratory relief that Atiku is seeking. Yeah. And in the declaratory relief, the judges can even say, you're right, but we're not giving you the relief you seek. Yeah, yes. They have the discretion. So I think that the discretion, if the country seems to be moving forward together and healing together, I think it makes it difficult for a declaratory relief, as they say. So I will encourage the APC to open their hearts and just forget about partisanship and let's do the best thing we can do for the country going forward.
This has been a really heavy conversation all the way around. And, we really appreciate you being on the show and just really sharing your views. But for me, my growing concern is education. Yes. And it is about our healthcare system, but more so education. And the numbers are saying 13.5 million Nigerian children are out of school. With our poor education system, our uneducated, but even so our healthcare. With your views, I'd like to know, how do you see us moving forward in the next few years, and what should be done as far as our budgets to make sure that we're beginning to see less numbers that are appalling as they are?
Well, several things. One, if you look at tertiary education,
Yes.
university education, the number of our best students, take the first-class students, the percentage of first-class students that remain in Nigeria after 5 years of graduation is less than 10%. So our best go away.
Yes.
Our doctors, the numbers are alarming. Our doctors are leaving us. So we can't afford to be spending all our money training people for foreign countries. So we need to take a look at how much money we spend on the tertiary side. On the primary side, I think we should focus on spending the bulk of our money educating children up to to leave primary school, up to secondary school level. At that point, our policy should be those that are pursuing practical courses that build things and make things that we need, government should support them. Those that want to be lawyers and
Philosophers.
mathematicians like me and philosophers, which is fine, should not be given the same support as those who want to be bricklayers and engineers and mechanics and people who can actually make things. So, but I think that we should look at the demand side. There's no point training a brilliant doctor in Nigeria today with government money because he will not stay, she will not stay.
But isn't the idea that most of them want to stay? They want to be able to stay in this country and work for it.
They have to use their skills. They have to be able to work in a place where their skills can be used and developed. And we don't have enough of that. So we need to look at the demand side. That's one of my reasons for screaming about creating jobs. If you don't create jobs, people who have skills will leave.
Yes.
And so it's a more complex thing. I agree with you that we shouldn't have 13.5 million children that are not educated up to the secondary school level. We should address that immediately with all the power we can. But we spend much of our budget in education on the tertiary side. And there we lose most
Yes.
good ones. And it's not sustainable to keep training smart people so that they leave. You just came back, right?
No, I didn't know.
You just came back too.
But the challenge we're having is that the conversation around education funding is actually not happening, especially there seems to be a very, people seem to be very precious about the way we fund tertiary education. And that conversation actually hasn't been introduced. We've had that conversation here before. We've said, why are we funding tertiary education, period?
Yes.
I mean, we've laid out so many challenges that we're facing as a nation. We have education, healthcare, brain drain. It almost feels overwhelming for an administration. So how do they even start to tackle
Priorities.
But what is what is
Grow
your
your economy. If your economy is growing at 10% a year,
That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
you'll be able to afford some of these things. Somebody said jokingly that we're too poor a nation to afford welfare. And it's true. You can't give what you don't have.
Exactly.
Grow the economy. If we're growing at 10% a year, in 10 years we'll be a $1 trillion economy. And we can afford some of these things. But in the meantime, since we can't afford many of these things, let us focus on the things. Let's grow the economy. That's in our control.
I think that it's interesting that you said grow the economy. I don't think that Nigerians disagree. I feel that it's more about how or which idea should we use to grow the economy, because there are a lot of economists such as yourself that agree. We all agree, even the president, we want to grow the economy, but it's more in agreeing on how to move forward.
No, we don't all agree.
You don't think so?
I've seen their EGRP. They're targeting in number of years 7%, as if it's a great thing. 7% is not a great thing. We already grew at 7%. It didn't do much good. If they told me we're going to grow at 15% by 2023, and we're going to put all instruments of state to make that happen, yes, then I know they're serious about it. But when I have 7% 2023, I know they're not serious, because that's not going to make a difference. So no, we don't have the sense of urgency and determination and focus on the fact that unless we grow and create 5 million jobs a year, 5 million jobs a year, mind you, if we don't do that, we're going nowhere. Everything else you're saying doesn't matter.
But in your reference now to welfare, was that a veiled dig at the social intervention programs like market money and trader money and all of those? You take a dim view of those, I imagine.
I take a very dim view of those.
Why?
Because you give somebody 10,000 naira the cost of collecting that 10,000 naira is more than 10,000 naira. It's a grant. It's an unsupervised, unstructured, indisciplined grant. And we shouldn't be doing that.
What should we be doing?
Well, what we should be doing is making interest rates lower so that people can employ. That is much more disciplined. Government should be out of the way of businesses. Look, if you have a business in Lagos State today, the state is all over you. Anybody who has a small business in Lagos State,
there are plenty.
and it is indiscriminate, it is unstructured, it is hostile. You're seen as the goose that lays the golden egg, and instead of waiting for the one egg a day, they want to slice you open and take all the eggs out, as the fairy tale says. So government is not friendly to business. And that's the problem. Let government focus on being friendly. Don't have a friendly attitude. When you want a permit from government, quickly, give it to him because he will soon start paying taxes. Government is not friendly to business. Lagos State overtaxes businesses and people. There's multiple taxation that you can't see. They don't provide services. They don't provide infrastructure. So let us embrace business. Let's embrace growth. Let's embrace the economy. If we have that, we know Buhari hates corruption. He says so, right? But we know him for that. We don't know him for saying, I love the economy. I love business. We don't. And I think that will have been a big difference between him and Atiku, because Atiku is seen as loving business. And that will have helped us in terms of employment and growth.
So what went wrong then? Were people just not paying attention to what they ought to have been looking at?
I am very, very reluctant to endorse the results of the election because I was in Lagos State. And when I went to vote in Lagos, I waited in line for 4 hours. I counted the amount of people in my polling unit and the poll I came to vote and the thing that was pasted, and there was at least a 60% turnout in my polling unit. And I went around a few around me. So when they tell me that the turnout in Lagos was 20%, I'm very suspicious. That's my experience, and that's anecdotal. So, but taking it as it is, the result as announced. Wisdom of the masses.
Since you brought up INEC, I just want to just take a minute to tell you, you sent a tweet at one point to say that INEC has lost all credibility as impartial umpire through incompetence, mismanagement, bias, abdicated the role to the court. And so my question to you is, we know this. Everyone that has come on our show has been, even the people that won have been disappointed with INEC's performance. It almost feels that the I in front of INEC has been dismissed. At the end of the day, we can't continue. We can't grow an economy if we don't have faith in the institutions. What do we need to do differently, and what are the things we need to do about INEC?
It is quite clear that nobody trusts INEC anymore. Whether it's deserved or not deserved, they don't trust INEC anymore. People prefer the courts. Oshun wasn't a good thing. And the court came and said, the language, I read these judgments. There's something wrong with me, but I read these judgments. And the language was very strong in the Oshun decision. And I think that INEC has now been seen as controlled by the government. And it's not good. So if you add all the power in the world, I would remove the head of INEC. I would change a whole bunch of things and make people recreate the faith in INEC, because it's very, very important. But yes, what I said was true. Nobody believes. Everybody wants to go to court. They have the maximum, the highest number of petitions already filed in this election, and the more are coming. Rivers State was a fiasco. Either they're just incompetent or I don't know. Whatever it is, INEC has lost credibility. And I would remove the head and change everything around, because that's what, and it's not personal. That's what they do, even in football teams. When a football team isn't doing well, you fire the coach, bring a new coach. So that's the first thing I'll do. But it won't happen.
Why do you say that?
It won't happen. I'm making a prediction that at least 50% of the ministers will be retained.
Well, we'll have you back to talk about that if that
Yeah.
happens.
Thank you.
Oh, once again, as always, it has been a
Insightful.
gloomy indictment, but hopefully with some silver linings of what we need to do, and hopefully we'll be able to do
I'm
it.
hopeful.
Yes.
I'm hopeful, but I'm not.
Are you optimistic?
No, I'm hopeful.
Just hopeful.
I'm just hopeful.
Well,
We'll
let's
see
all
how
stay
that
hopeful.
goes.
Let's all stay
Fingers
hopeful.
crossed.
Let's all stay hopeful.
And I wish Nigeria the best.
Always.
All right. We wish hopefully next time we'll have a more upbeat conversation about the economy. On that note, thank you.
Thank
and
you,
it's
sir.
time now for a short break.